Bom dias. Sorry, that's the only Spanish I'm able to help you with here today. I know that you will be having some translation devices. In the name of diversity, today I'm being narrated by a woman, right? So that's good, I think, you know. This is my first time in Mexico, can you believe so? Sorry. But I came in last night and I'll say you made me feel very, very welcome because it was rainy, it was gray, and so thank you for that. So these are not easy times, I'll be honest with you. I have been advocating for sustainability, purpose for more than 18 years. 18 years. And right now, we're not where we should be at. I kind of feel like this whole idea about sustainability and purpose is a bit like Pokemon. Everybody is searching for it, but nobody really knows why. I don't know how many CEOs are in the room. Hands up. CEOs, MDs, managing directors, some hands up here. There's a few, yeah, okay. Some are like, yeah, no, I'm not going to put my hand up. It's okay. It's okay. It's not an easy time. It's really not an easy time to be a leader. It's not an easy time. There's so many things on the agenda. We had our panel about wages, digitalization, artificial intelligence. Just staying in business these days is tough. So I understand why when the topic of sustainability, sustainable development goals are suddenly on the agenda, it's very tough. Because let's be honest with ourselves, it was much, much easier to be a CEO 10 years ago. You could play golf, and you can talk about numbers. Today, I would claim that the CEO looks a little bit like this. A little bit of a goldfish, stuck in sort of short-term thinking. It's very, very difficult to have that long-term perspective. Even though sort of being in Mexico City and know that you have the pyramids out there, it should sort of give you that long-term perspective. But it's so difficult. This idea about driving profits. If you look at how long time a CEO sits in the chair today, it's a couple of years, then it's on to the next job. Why should you put it on your shoulders to fix the world's problems? I come from the world of marketing. In some countries, a CMO is sitting in his or her chair for 2.5 years. How are we going to do any change? Secondly, the thing is, and I heard the panel before, that so many Mexicans live only for 5,000 pesos, which is unfathomable. How do you deal with that? So one thing, there are people who have a need. If we go to my country, Denmark, I have to ask myself the questions, when is enough enough? You know? I don't know how much you know about Denmark, but I can tell you one thing. Denmark is not a green country. Yes, we get most of our energy on a day when the wind is blowing. We get most of our energy from renewable energy sources. That's amazing. The problem is, though, that the average Dane's carbon footprint is 13 tons. And we need to reach 2.5 tons. So we need to change habits. We need to change behaviors. And that's not easy. And if we look at where we are with the Sustainable Development Goals, we're halfway there. Let's use the analogy of a football match, right? We're halfway through the match, but only 12% delivery on the goals. And for those who are not into football, let's talk mobile phones, because we have them in our hands every day. You know, would we leave our home with only 12% charge on the battery? Probably we wouldn't. So we have a tremendous assignment in front of us. And I think the key challenge right now is to redefine leadership. And redefine leadership towards change. And be very realistic about that the business of business is still business. So how do we drive that change? My little mission started at the climate summit in Copenhagen. 2009. We had Barack Obama, we had Tony Blair, we had all these elected government officials, and this sort of happened. There was other people than the friends that were sleeping, but that's okay. So I, working in advertising, obviously asked myself, so what can I do? What can I do with the skill sets that I have? So a very young Thomas, much less gray hairs, wrote a book called Good Advertising. Back then it was a very, very simple premise. If you do good for people and planet, it is good for brand and bottom line. These were the early days of Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. This was sort of the early days of Sustainable Development Goals. So just this idea that anyone would actually do something for any of this besides profit was quite novel. So I want to thank you, first of all, that you showed up here and you want to show a different kind of leadership. Well done. But the question is, what type of leadership do we need? I know we can't have a sustainability presentation without Patagonia, right? That's how it is. So let's talk Patagonia. And the first myth is, in fact, that purpose and sustainability drives profit. It doesn't always. It's not always easy. I know a lot of people say, look at Patagonia as an example of how great these things are, how great a company it is. But if you actually read closer, he says they had to take Patagonia into a non-profit because if you are a slave to the shareholder model, you can't drive change. And isn't that the challenge? That you have shareholders who want to have a profit, and do they really want to hear that much about the Sustainable Development Goals? Probably not. Second myth, big brands cannot be sustainable. I'm sorry. You know, most of the big brands I have worked with in my life, it's like twisting an oil tanker. It takes a very, very long time. Small brands, agile, fast, sustainable from the beginning. So how do we change those narratives? The third thing is action matters. I hear this a lot, and it's almost like a betting war. Companies trying to say, we're going to do this, our goals are this and that, 2050, 2030. I don't know how many of you remember who was number 3 in the World Cup, Soccer World Cup, the last one. Number 3, Soccer World Cup? No? Nobody? So I usually use this joke, but my lovely partner is here today with my son, so excuse me, but I'll still use this little joke here. So let's say I'm in Mexico and I get home earlier from the conference than was expected. Unfortunately, I take my lovely partner being together with another man. I get very angry and I said, honey, what are you doing? And she says, easy, Thomas. I promise you, towards 2030, I'm going to be a little bit less unfaithful every year until we're back together. Would you accept that? So the challenge is, as companies, we give people these 2030, 2040, 2050 goals, but remember, every time we are in the supermarket, every time we buy, we have a choice. So how do we enable that? It's not easy. So unfortunately, what I have seen since my first book, about a decade ago to today, is that brands have moved from talking about how great their products are, how great they are, you know, a toothbrush that makes your teeth the whitest, to now apparently being the best in the world, to being the best who saves the world. Is that really a very believable narrative? When we see big CEOs like Tim Cook stand up and talk about climate neutrality, about diversity, yet the problem is that it seems we have a trust issue. People aren't trusting us, and that's a massive issue. It's a trust issue. Because people say, what are you really doing? Most of this stuff is, and I get that, you know, why we're advertising all the great stuff we're doing, because most of the time we're also part of the mess, the damage. So I had to write a second book and sort of redefine how we look at leadership, and maybe not putting ourselves as the actors of change. Because if you're going to say, I'm going to save the world, and somebody at some point is going to find out that's not going to happen. It's kind of like, take the LGBTQ issue. I know this is Pride Week, amazing. So the LGBTQ issue is like, just as you think you are there, it's LGBTQ+. So all these issues are moving. I promise you, in my first book, I had cases that at that time was best practice. When I look at it today, it's greenwashing. So these topics move all the time. So I wanted to kind of create a different types of conversation and really say, what if we stop being the hero? What if we actually make people the heroes of the narrative? Because the thing is, if we are in Denmark, if we're in Mexico, wherever we are, we know people want to change. How do we want to enable that change? So obviously this guy is doing a bit of an AC/DC riff, highway to climate hell. And so we know there's an urgency. We know there's an urgency to act. And how do we ultimately do that? The problem is, and I don't know how many of you have children? Children? Yeah, quite a few of you. I brought my little son Theo as well. So the only reason I say that is not do it for your children. The only reason is, most of the time, films, movies are very good at actually saying how the future is going to look like. So let's look at some movies here, right? Because another problem is, I've been a little bit tough against you companies, but fundamentally, we people are very, very lazy. You know? Probably you have seen the film WALL-E, yeah? Every time I hear about sustainability, people are always like going back to basic, going back to green, urban gardening. This is probably a much more true image of what the future is going to look like. Sorry. Because inherently we are lazy. So a lot of the time when I see companies wanting to drive change, it's not easy. And let me give you one example, another film example, Happy Feet. We all know Happy Feet, hopefully do, maybe we don't. Another Pixar movie. This guy, Lovelace, very famous penguin, but obviously got this six-pack ring stuck around its neck. Horrible. So Carlsberg, the brewery company, wanted to do something about that. They wanted to deliver on the SDG goals. They wanted to act on it. So what they did was they created a little glue between the six-pack. Innovation, real innovation, invested heavily in it, but people just couldn't do it. They were too lazy to kind of work in a new habit. So quite often when we at companies try to do something, we don't like the change and we push back. So we're a little bit stuck. We are a little bit stuck. And so where do we go from here? I think the key challenge is now, if we can deliver a business case to you, where you can go back and you can say, this actually makes business sense. Maybe we have a clue there. The thing is, most of the time, people say they want to buy products. And that's the problem. Every time you ask people, do you want to do good? Of course you want to do good. But how many of us actually follow through? So these are the numbers from an organization called Sustainable Brands. But if you look at it, there's a gap of 39%. For all of us, that's a business opportunity. If we can figure out how do we bridge those 39%, and maybe it's not so strange, because think about every time we have a New Year's resolution. You know, you promise you want to go for that run, or maybe I want to bike more to work. Why am I stuck in the Mexico City traffic? I should be bicycling. That would be the right thing to do. But then it's raining, and then you're not going to go on that run, and you're not going to bicycle. So basically, we need to find a way where we can motivate people. And I think the way to do that is not to be a preacher, but to be a coach, a company that's there, that got people's back. So fundamentally, the leadership I think is important to think about is not putting yourself as the agent of change, but actually truly thinking about how can you enable people to change? How can you inspire people to change? So I'm going to share this quick little model with you here today. This is a branding model. Sorry about that. But the one fundamental question I want you to think about is, who can you help people become? How can you, as a company, help people towards the journey, towards facing some of their biases, some of their prejudices, thinking about the climate footprint. If you can be the company that does that, that inspires people towards that, I think you're much more successful. Because you're not saying, I'm going to change the world, but you're going to say, let's do this together. We know this is tough. So let me give you an example of a company who does that. A company from Sweden, my neighboring country, a company called Oatly. Oatly does oat milk. Do you know Oatly? Yeah? Oatly. Okay, perfect. So basically one of the things, and I really love what they do, they go after milk. It's a very, very clever thing. They ran this ad a while back where they actually said, we're going to share our carbon footprint if, dear dairy, you're going to do the same. So they use it as a competitive advantage. Suddenly sustainability becomes this little magic superpower. And the great thing about that is as well, they're not really talking about themselves. They're enabling us to do something. They're enabling us to embrace plant-based food. I only touched down a little bit on Mexican food. I'm going to say I love it already. But where I'm from, I can promise you our food is horrible. I think the only progressive thing was my dad was in the kitchen. That was very progressive at the time. But Danish food is overboiled potatoes, pork meat that probably tastes like the sole of my shoe, and a lot of gravy. It's not a very nice kitchen. So obviously when you have a brand like Oatly, that inspires me to think about plant-based cooking. Because eating plant-based is probably a very effective way of cutting down on carbon emissions. And so when they do that, nobody needs to pay me to advertise or anything, because if you go onto my Instagram, you will see me sharing this beautiful vegan pie. But obviously change is difficult, so that reality probably looks a little bit like that. My partner can testament to that. So how we operate as companies are fundamentally changing, and how we should talk about the work that we do as companies. With my first book, Goodvertising, you would add environmentally friendly, conscious, all this stuff in front of whatever product. And I can promise you, sometimes when I'm in London, I see sustainable concrete, sustainable aviation fuel. Sustainability as a word doesn't really make much sense anymore. So when we have a trust issue, the big question is, in fact, who can we trust? What companies do we trust? We talk about change. We talk about sustainable development goals, so 17 goals. But what company have in fact created change in your life? Think about that. What company have created change in your life? And that's why I had to write this second book called The Hero Trap, because I realized very few companies had. And I think it's because we go about our leadership the wrong way. Because we look so much at ourselves instead of actually thinking, how do we create change, individual change in all of us? How do we do that? And this comes back to authenticity. Because Oatly, because they inspired me to embrace plant-based cooking, I believe in them. I feel they're authentic. So I think we're heading towards a place where it's much more about the transformation, the change that you can enable in people's lives. Because that change is measurable. I can feel it. So that's why we have to ask that one pivotal question. Who can you help people become? How can you think about how you can enable people towards your products, through your services, even inside the company? So when I looked at this and tried to understand it from a communication point of view, it's quite interesting. So I compared, and this is from the US, I did a survey with GfK. So I compared 20 commercials talking about climate, diversity, etc., that put the company at the center of the change, with 20 commercials that said, all of us, we can be the agents of change. And the interesting thing is, people feel better about buying the product. There's a higher chance that people feel motivated to be part of the change, and people actually really want to know more about what it is that you do. So for me, maybe we are slightly closer to understanding that little 39% gap and how we bridge it. So if you want to know more about any of this stuff, There's obviously a little book for you there. It's a compact version. There's a bit of a methodology that you can download for free. And I know we're doing a masterclass tomorrow as well. So for those of you who want to know more about this, know more about the tool, please come join me tomorrow. But the bigger challenge, obviously, is change. How do we create the change? What motivates us? Is it just do good, for the good of our heart? But we're in the world of business. It's profits. Why should we do anything for climate? Why should we do anything for sustainability? It's true though, right? It's true. And for those of us who has children, also very true. I brought little Theo today, so obviously I want to do it for him as well. Maybe a little bit for Leo as well. But what arguments can we tell each other that really drives change? I believe it needs to be life-centric. Very few of us go on some sort of moral, ethical crusade. Yes, when we ask us, but the reality on the ground is not. For me, why I love sustainability is because it's about life. It's about all these things that actually matters. Brands doesn't really matter too much. Think about branding as an exercise where you sit around a dinner table. People are going to be very bored of you if you keep talking about the inches on a flat screen. But if you talk things about like being stuck in traffic, about minimum wages, about climate, about having a breathable air, having water. I mean, I was devastated to hear how close you were to running out of water in Mexico City recently. Even that should be an eye-opening thing for any CEO. So only one time I've actually seen all of us having a capacity to change, because right now it's not looking good. Only one time I've seen our capacity to change, and that was during COVID. Because imagine that during COVID, we actually all stopped up. We saw CO2 levels go down, we stopped consuming, we just stopped in general. Obviously that was for a very short moment, back to the goldfish. Because we're back at it again, right? We didn't learn much. And I wish I could share a lot of good examples of driving change. But the one thing I will tell you is that going on some sort of moral crusade is not easy. We heard the story just recently on stage here about somebody having 5,000 pesos that's just dreaming about going on a holiday. Should we be hitting them in their head and talking about climate emissions, etc.? Most likely not. So in the European Union, there's one little behavior change thing that has worked. And this is this little label. If you think about it, it's quite clever. Because if you want to buy a new television, Philips TV or Samsung TV, they kind of look the same. If you can get the A and actually save money, it kind of makes sense. So this is probably one of the best examples I have. The problem is when we bring that into retail. I see a lot of retailers right now labeling their products. They put labels on it and they say this is greener than the next one. Apparently that's not enough, sadly enough. Most of the time when that enables change is when it's connected to a discount. So when you do your effort, still think about the fundamentals, price, quality, and convenience. It's so sad. We want things to be easy. We want things to be simple. Here's another example. Uber. I absolutely love this. How can you think about, in your products and your services, giving people a choice? This is from London. They do it in the US as well. How clever is it? We know that anyway, if we're stuck in the rain or whatever, we might still go for an Uber, but giving people a more conscious choice and saying there is public transportation that you can take. Open it up for people. Think about what possibilities you can give people. Because quite often the thing is that most of us, if we look at our portfolio of products, how many of them are actually sustainable? We know the sustainable products are out there. This is a product that's been around in so many different versions. Washing detergents, if you think about washing detergents, 98% of that is water. The rest of the effective ingredients. Yet still none of us are changing in the industry because people don't want a little pack that looks like this. They want to buy what looks like a value for money. So it's so inherently difficult. So it's not an easy situation. COVID learned me one thing, that the best things in life aren't things. And there's so many things that brands and companies can teach people. And I think when you start teaching people something, when you start making them think about something, that's when it becomes a valuable relationship, a transformative relationship. So let me talk IKEA for one moment. We all know what IKEA is famous for, right? No? IKEA? Yeah? Breaking up couples. It's true. You cannot go into an IKEA store without getting into an argument. This labyrinth-like mall does something to us, right? I always said, if you can go into an IKEA, survive that with your partner, marry that person. It's going to last for life. Now, obviously, what IKEA is known for is these mega malls, often on the outskirts of cities. So not a very sustainable business model, even though it started as a mail order catalog shipping, so they had flat packs. But what they're starting to do right now is doing these smaller stores inside the cities. And what they help you do is they're delivering on democratizing sustainable living. So you go in there, and a couple of people are sitting behind a laptop, and they're helping design your dream living room. Everything is being delivered to your doorstep. You don't have to drive out to the mall, to drive the things back. So thinking about how you actually enable change, inspire change. And yes, IKEA is fast furniture. They're far from good. But what I like about them is that they sometimes get people not to eat the Swedish meatballs, but actually try plant-based, which is amazing. Because the sad thing is, a lot of this stuff we talk about, our cities, our internet, it's all about shopping. Think about how few things we can do in a city that doesn't demand money. I'm so old, so I'm at the beginning of the internet. I remember when the internet came out, and it was this marvelous idea about collaboration, unity, etc. Today, the first search results are companies trying to sell us stuff. Even that has been taken over. So fundamentally, how do we as cities also view and ask ourselves the question, who can we help citizens become? Healthier, more conscious? I'm so happy to actually see in Mexico City a lot of bicycle lanes. Well done. Even in London, they don't really do that with a lot of success. And I'm going to show you another thing from Denmark. This is the one day a year where the sun is shining. So this is fake advertising. Very rarely looks like this. But why I'm showing this picture is across the world, I'm so happy to see that urban gyms popping up. Cities actually starting to cater to other things than just creating a city for shopping. So when people say, what is sustainability about? It is about life. It's about all these things that actually add meaning to us. And the problem right now with the leadership, with the stories that we tell each other, we need to redefine those stories because it doesn't work. I've been advocating for 18 years. The 12%, we're not there. We're doing something wrong. I had a chat with a guy called Chris Jordan a while back. And Chris Jordan, you might not know him, but he's very famous for one iconic image he took back in 2006. So he's a photographer and an activist. And some of you might have seen this image taken on Midway Island. This was the very beginning of ocean plastics. At least for me, he was one of the guys who really sort of moved this agenda to the very forefront. How many of you have seen this picture? Some of you, yeah? So I had a conversation with him because he's been advocating for change, trying to scare us to act with these albatrosses who swallows ocean plastics thousands of kilometers away from the nearest piece of land. Then he showed me a new piece of image, this one. And I started questioning him about this image. What is it about? Is it rising sea levels? What is it? And he said, he's been trying to scare all of us to act for such a long time, since 2006. and he realized that the only thing we do is we shut down. We don't do anything. So this image is in fact about the love to the southern Chilean nature. So he portrays love. He actually gives us a completely different narrative of what we might lose. So I think also as corporates, we might have to rethink how we do all of this stuff. Even when you look at Antonio Guterres, who's saying we're on a highway to hell. What is that going to do? There's already so many things that are scary. A lot of Mexicans can't barely feed their families. And now we have to think about saving the planet. These are not easy things. So in all of this, I think the most fundamental role you can do is be there, have people's back and say, we're going to help you. We're going to give you those options. We're going to help you on that journey. And for me, that is leadership. The best leaders I've had in my life are those who have helped me achieve amazing things. And that brings me back to the change, because where's change coming from? Government? Nah, most likely not, sorry to say. We tend to change governments every 4 years. In the UK, they change governments more often than I change my underwear. So it's very difficult to create change with government. It goes right wing, it goes left wing. Companies? I don't believe so. Because by the end of the day, companies serve profit. The shareholder model is profit, profit, profit. And when we hit recession, purpose and sustainability, we forgot about that, the goldfish mentality. So if you think about change, let's take smoking. For those of you who try to quit smoking. You know, your loved ones can tell you, your children can tell you, your doctor can even try and tell you that your lungs aren't really looking great. On the cigarette packaging, they might try and scare you by showing you cancer-ridden lungs. Like we do climate campaigns. The only thing that happens is we ignore the campaign and we keep smoking. We ignore the climate fear-mongering and we keep doing what we're doing. So the only person who can in fact quit those cigarettes are you. So fundamentally, I believe that change begins with the individual. So if you can inspire individuals at scale to drive that change, I do think we can succeed. And I do think that we can then bridge this 39% gap, so hopefully you can build a good business case in your brands and businesses. So 3 key takeaways. Number 1, don't be a hero, but think about how you can turn people into the heroes. Enable action at scale. Think about how you make it fundamentally easy for people to do the right choice. Think about price, quality, and convenience. And lastly, redefine growth towards human betterment. So that's what I have to share with you here today. Thank you so much for inviting me, and obviously feel free to connect. And I will say change is difficult, so best luck on the change journey. Thank you.